Good. So, modern China, like I said, this is Unit 12, our very last unit. This is Part 2. If we go back to the Chinese Civil War, this is something that happened, starting in the 1920s. It rolled on into the 1930s. It stopped during World War II because they were both sides were fighting against, well, you guys can tell me who they're fighting against. Who are the Chinese fighting in World War II? Thank you very much. The Japanese. And you remember how terrible the Japanese were to the Chinese? That's a long time kind of thing. It goes back to the late 1800s. If you remember, the Japanese were beating up on the Chinese back then and taking Korea from them and so on. Well, once the Japanese are defeated by the Allies in World War II, then the Civil War renews after World War II. Got two different sides. One of the sides is the communist side of Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao eventually, and the other side is the nationalist side of Chiang Kai-shek or Jiang Jiechi, and their party is the Nationalist Party or the Kuomintang Party. That fight goes on for a number of years, and they have different visions of what China should be like. This is very much like the Cold War, in fact. What we have is a large number of peasants, let's say, who support the communists because, well, if you think about what communists promise, they promise to help poor people and make everybody equal. So China's mostly made up of peasants, and so a lot of people were supporting the communists and supporting Mao. The nationalists were supported by people who were, let's say, middle class, people who wanted democracy, people who wanted capitalism, and that fight goes on. The United States starts to support the nationalist side, or the side of Jiang Jiechi, because we're anti-communist. Remember, we had this whole containment policy going on during the Cold War. In spite of our help, the communists won this civil war and took over China. Jiang Jiechi, the guy that we had supported, and millions of Chinese people who wanted capitalism, fled China. They didn't want to stay and be under communist rule, and they went to an island, which is off the coast of China, called Taiwan. And they established the Republic of China, a kind of capitalist China under a semi-dictatorship of this guy, Jiang Jiechi, which is still going on today. Taiwan is still a country independent from China, even though communist China claims that it's theirs. And it's sort of a rogue province. But we still support Taiwan. We sell them a lot of military equipment so that they can maintain their independence from the Chinese. Mao becomes the leader of China, and he continues to expand China. They move into, for example, Tibet, a country which is on the border of China. They take that over. They say that they're freeing the peasants there from control, but in fact, they are simply taking over Tibet. They take over parts of Mongolia, some parts of India. In fact, there's a few wars that you don't know about between China and India that have happened in the last 60, 70 years or so. And as China becomes a very large, very populous communist country, it freaks the United States out. It freaks out really all of the capitalist countries, all of the countries that are democratic and hoping, wishing that China wouldn't have gone in this direction, but really not much you can do about it. Couldn't contain communism, and it takes over a good part of the world's population. Mao has this idea, it is communism, it is sort of Marxism, as we talked about in previous units, but he has this new kind of idea called Maoism. And it's kind of like what happened in the Soviet Union, it's just more extreme. And what I mean by that is Karl Marx thinks that the communist revolution will happen in an industrialized country, and the working class, the factory workers, would be the ones who are, taking over and liberating factory workers from capitalist control. You don't have too many factories in China, you don't have too many factory workers, you have a whole bunch of peasants. And so Maoism is about freeing the peasants and then collectivizing their agriculture. giving them communism, having the peasants share everything together. Nobody owns a cow anymore or a rice field anymore. Everybody is owning everything together and working together in order to feed the country and feed themselves. This works out to I guess the benefit in some ways of peasants, because land is taken away from rich people and given to all the peasants together. But as you'll see in just a second, this doesn't usually work very well. It's if people are sort of doing a group project in their fields, some people are, let's say, usually more willing to work hard, and some people are less willing to work hard. And then everybody gets kind of frustrated, and then everybody doesn't work very hard, or nobody works very hard. As part of Maoism, too, Mao becomes like Stalin or like Hitler or like Mussolini, a totalitarian dictator. Probably as extreme or more extreme than any of those guys. He's viewed as like the latest Chinese emperor, a godlike figure who can do no wrong, and everybody sort of, they've gotten rid of religion, and so they replace religion with Mao and Maoism. Well, Mao decides that what China needs is to move away from having so many peasants, and have those peasants maybe start to be sort of peasants and workers at the same time, without really setting up factories to do that. He launches in 1953 a 5-year plan to increase industry, which is really kind of hard to do when you just have a bunch of farmers who don't know what they're doing. That doesn't really work out very well, and so in 1958 he tries something new called the Great Leap Forward. With the Great Leap Forward, he's trying to, like I say, create an industrialized state, or really just use all of the peasants. They got hundreds of millions of peasants to try to create a modern economy. And so he orders that all of the peasants, once again, collectivize their agriculture, that they all work together in order to produce the food that China needs. But at the same time, he wants them also to make steel, sort of like in their villages, in their backyards. He wants them to make steel. This is pretty much impossible to do. And so what a lot of peasants do in order to come up with the production of steel is they take all of the stuff that they have that's made out of metal and melt it or smelt it. They create super hot fires, melt their woks, their pots, their pans, their tools, anything made out of metal, and then create sort of iron or steel out of that. It doesn't work. So the peasants are making steel that's useless while not farming, and also angry about having to pool all of their land and cows and everything together. And it creates really a huge shortage of food. There is a famine that breaks out, and this sounds like a crazy number, but about 20 million Chinese people die based on Mao's crazy idea of let's industrialize, let's pool all of the land and animals together. So the Great Leap Forward is sometimes called the Great Step Backwards by people who are willing to risk death and imprisonment by making a joke about that. That really damaged Mao's reputation, and he starts to lose power over a longer period of time. In 1966, though, he decided to stop that and seize power again. And he does this by enlisting young people who are your age, college-age students, and he calls them to form militias or to form sort of military groups and seize power away from the government, seize power away from anybody who has power other than Mao. So young people overthrow their teachers, they overthrow government officials, they persecute people, they beat up their teachers, actually. They beat up government officials. They claim to be doing all of this for Mao, and Mao sort of liking this. And once again, he becomes this godlike dictator again. The young people are just fanatical about Mao. And really everything changes toward putting Mao right back on top of this totalitarian state. The people who were young and who were overthrowing everybody except for Mao were known as the Red Guards. They wear armbands. It would look very totalitarian, almost like fascist to you, I think, with the way they are supporting their totalitarian leader and the way that they're together and just persecuting anybody who doesn't agree with Mao. So intellectuals and artists, anybody who resisted Mao's absolute power was either imprisoned or executed or overthrown. It's really an amazing thing. Well, Mao passes away a few years later, and China is sort of stuck in this not very good economy, dictatorship, and people aren't really very happy. And along comes this guy at the bottom of the page there, Deng Xiaoping. And Deng Xiaoping becomes the leader of China, and he decides that he's going to move away from Maoism. You know, the Chinese had become a more normal state by that point in time. They had joined the United Nations. They had improved relations with the United States. For a long time, we were on the outs with them. We actually fought a war against China. I don't know if you guys know too much about that, but we'll talk about that next time. And so Deng Xiaoping says, let's try to make the people economically happy by letting them have a bit of capitalism. And so that happens. The Chinese start to have factories that are producing things that people in America or the rest of the world would buy. This thing keeps rolling, kind of steamrolling along. Millions of people move out of the farmlands and they move to cities. And these factories are going. People are really pretty happy. They're making money. They can buy products. Products are being made. So everything's going pretty well until the late 1980s. And people are kind of excited about having capitalism, but capitalism and democracy seem to go together in terms of world history. And so people wanted in China to move beyond the quote-unquote Communist Party that's now allowing capitalism and actually have democracy. And so young people, again, start to demonstrate, not for a renewed dictatorship like they did as Red Guards, but for democracy. And the place that they do that is called Tiananmen Square. It's in the middle of the capital. The capital is Beijing. Tiananmen Square is where really everything important happens. Even nowadays, it's this gigantic square. It's got a huge picture of Mao up. And they start demonstrating there. And this goes on for weeks. They're asking for democracy. They build a kind of statue of liberty sort of thing there. And it's all these young people. It seems like a revolution is about to happen and that China is going to become a democratic state. It was a very exciting time to be able to watch all this on TV every night. Sadly, and I'll show you a video in just a second about this, but sadly, Deng Xiaoping said, enough's enough, and he brought the military in, and they slaughtered the students. They slaughtered the people who were demonstrating for democracy. After they had snuffed out this democracy movement, they decided to try to make people happy again with capitalism, letting people pretty much do anything that they wanted in terms of making money, having businesses and so on. But they would maintain real strict control over the society, allow no democracy whatsoever. The so-called Communist Party is a one-party state. It's still very totalitarian. But people, as long as they make money and shut up, everyone's going to be happy. And so that's really what's happened with modern China. Since 1989, it's become even more fabulously wealthy. Lots and lots of people. There's probably 100 million Chinese people now who are middle class, like American middle class people. They've made crazy money. It's the biggest car market in the world. You know, it's using more concrete than the world has ever used before. There's skyscrapers everywhere. It's just an incredibly booming country right now. Dominating world trade, creating a new Silk Road with highways and railroads going along the old Silk Road, and hoping and wanting to sell its products to other nations, building this thing, spending a lot of money on infrastructure, investing in the third world, buying up resources in Africa and helping African states have a better economy so that they can buy Chinese products. Challenging the United States, really, for world leadership. You think about vaccines, for example, and the Chinese are giving vaccines to people around the world that the United States is, we've got our own vaccines for COVID right now, and we're not being super generous with giving those to other places. The Chinese are doing that, and the Russians are doing that too. So it's kind of interesting the way that that's working out. You have to know, though, that China is still really a dictatorship. And there are lots of different examples of that. There's a group of people who are Muslim who live in the far western part of China called the Uyghurs. And the Uyghurs are being persecuted. They're being suppressed by the government and put into camps, really, in order to be, quote unquote, re-educated, but really just sort of trying to control them, make them good Chinese citizens and listen to the dictatorship rather than being people who want maybe independence from China, because they're different. They have nationalism, right? They're a different kind of people. They have a different religion. The Chinese are officially no religion, and so they're being persecuted. Or Tibet, too, still under the control of the Chinese. They don't want to be under the control of the Chinese. Millions of Chinese people have been moved to Tibet, and so, trying to take over them culturally and linguistically with their language. There's also Hong Kong, which for a long time was under the control of Britain in a semi-democratic place. And Britain gave that back to the Chinese, and the Chinese said, we'll be nice to Hong Kong. We'll let them kind of do their democracy thing. But recently they've started to kind of cut down on that and squash these people of Hong Kong who are demonstrating. If you watch the news, you'll see all of these things still in the news. And like I say, it's just still very much a totalitarian dictatorship.